A family of 7 has faced a bloody loss of a teenage daughter, sister, and loving human being in a calm morning while awaiting a holiday that's intended to be a celebration for the caring and nurturing environments that parents provide to their young ones. The loss would end up being one of the most gruesome, antagonizing, and relentless murder crimes that anyone could ever imagine, practically disembodying a teenage girl's corpse. The girl, Tristyn Bailey, who was previously known to bring up the light in any room while on a cheer squad at her local middle school, but no one would ever see her perform a cheer routine again or even have a conversation with her for the last time, as she was tortured in the darkness. The family was growing up and lived in the Durbin Crossings neighborhood of St. Johns County in Northeast Florida, while they were just going about their routines, getting ready to spend some quality time together as a family, not yet having realized that they were bound to have changed lives forever, while Tristyn Bailey would be going through one of the most betraying experiences of her young life. Tristyn was a young 13-year-old girl in the 7th grade, attending Patriot Oaks Academy in St. Johns County, which is a town of about 270,000 in Florida. While she was one of 200,000, she was pretty well known amongst her friends, peers, classmates, pretty much anyone who also lived in the Durbin Crossings neighborhood. She was known on the cheerleading team to always bring a flair to any cheer practice or a smile on her face. She was known to say, "You mess with one of us, you mess with all of us," on her squad. She was known amongst her family to always be energetic, to be beautiful, to be classy and happy, to always be ready to go, ready to roll with any situation, and to bring a little bit of sass to everything, but it was always in good spirits. On any regular day, Tristyn and her family had their routine. The kids would go to school, and while Tristyn was on the cheerleading squad and probably had one of the most demanding schedules of them all, she was never known to bring any corruption or nuisance to the people around her or at school. Her parents were innocent and worked innocent jobs. Her father, Forrest Bailey, worked as a banker and a co-owner of a hair salon. Her mother, Stacy Bailey, also was the owner of the same salon, and was just casually awaiting for her day, her celebration dedicated to herself as a mother of raising 5 kids. While on a warm, quiet Sunday morning of May 2021, the Bailey family, also known as the Bailey 7, they were just waking up. They were just about to get their day started, getting ready to meet in their kitchen as a family to have a Mother's Day celebration and making a giant, great breakfast for their mom. Sophia Bailey, Tristyn's sister, she came down to the kitchen and she was going to prepare breakfast as she normally would, and this time it was to commemorate their mom. But she noticed that it was a little bit different. It was a little bit more quiet, and the breakfast that they would have made for the 7 of them, well, she and Forrest, their father, they noticed that some of that warmth and sassiness they're usually hearing in the morning was a little bit delayed. Now, we have to keep in mind, Tristyn, she was a little girl. She was 13 years old. Now, on a regular weekend, she might have been out a little bit late and had slept in. She might have gone with a friend, had a reason to be somewhere other than home. But this was 9 a.m., where the family was usually up and ready to go, especially on a Sunday, and on a Mother's Day nonetheless. The family had now realized that Tristyn was not anywhere around the house, in the house, or anywhere nearby the house. They thought that she was missing at this point, and so they took it upon themselves to start searching and scouring the nearby areas of the neighborhood, the streets. And they would later account to this by saying, well, it became a living nightmare. It was later to be found a new normal, and a routine never foreseen by the family. Forrest Bailey, in this case, is actually known to say that once they realized that Tristyn wasn't anywhere to be found, that it shattered their day, and it was definitely an impending doom. Their lives would be changed forever. So by 10 a.m. that Sunday morning of Mother's Day, the family actually ends up calling the St. Johns County Sheriff's Office and reports Tristyn missing. And as the community comes together throughout this case, each part of the town really takes a hand in what accounts for everything that happens. The sheriff's office actually posted a message to their Facebook account and a sort of plea in asking the community to help them find anything about the girl. They asked them and posted a bulletin of general information about where she might have been and if people have seen her around the neighborhood. Deputies at the St. Johns County Sheriff's Office, they had actually heard from local residents that, well, they knew about teens, friends, classmates, people from the school, young kids that would go through these sort of tunnels and paths in the neighborhood as places to hang out and just meet up. And that kind of already sounds like a morbid place to find a child that is nowhere to be found so far. But the deputies actually ended up going off of this claim and going to search through these tunnels and paths and found nothing about Tristyn. Not only that, but they ended up going house to house, especially to houses in the neighborhood that had video surveillance, because this was a sort of safe neighborhood, as it was supposed to be, where these houses would have video surveillance. And they ended up going to ask them if they had seen anything, but they ended up still not finding anything at the moment. Unfortunately, none of these things had worked for anybody just yet. Not the law enforcement going door to door, not the video surveillance or asking residents if they had seen or even heard a glimpse of where Tristyn was. And a lot of time had passed. So much time so far that it was already about 4:50 p.m. and some young person is missing. They might have been taken. And that might have been especially scary for her family, especially this alert. This alert wasn't just like any other one, which would be the cause of maybe a runaway child or parents arguing back and forth and trying to gain custody, possession of their kid. This alert didn't last very long at all and was actually going to be the very beginning of the dark and twisted nature of this entire situation start to unfold before everyone's eyes, especially the eyes of a neighbor, a resident in the nearby neighborhood that was walking through and had seen something out of the corner of their eye, something that alerted them and scared them probably to get a closer look just to see what they were staring at. It's probably a second glance type of thing that you didn't really believe it at first, but this person had seen a girl's body in a retention pond, a girl's body that was lying in the Saddlestone Drive cul-de-sac area, which is a nearby neighborhood and street. And this is actually where it was an alert for the local sheriff's department of St. Johns County, where they had started to unfold just who this was. Almost immediately after that, detective officials and investigators began scouring the area of this retention pond to just get an identification of this girl. The same identification that they would eventually and soon find that it was Tristyn Bailey's body lying in the retention pond. Now, this is an area where residents, people in the area, it was a comfortable spot, a common area where people would just walk by. But now it was this dark, twisted wasteland of an area where a girl had been found just lying there helplessly and lifelessly. Now, this was the point where Sheriff Hardwick would be a spokesperson in this entire scenario for the neighborhood and the state of Florida, for that matter, where he would have to be presentable on camera and broadcasting the situation, of explaining just how tragic this situation was, and they would begin their search for what exactly happened in the events that led up to them finding her body there lying by itself in the first place.
About 6 p.m. last night, one of our residents actually, based on the information we were putting out, was actually out looking around his area where he lives and actually discovered what has now been verified as Tristyn Bailey's body in a wooded area. I apologize. Thank you for correcting me. Tristyn Bailey, and I do apologize. Tristyn Bailey's body that was actually located by a person in the neighborhood, a citizen in the neighborhood, and actually called 911.
Once that resident had made the claim, and of course investigators and the local sheriff's department had begun searching this area just to try and determine what had exactly happened to Tristyn's body, because they had found her brutally and vigorously stabbed to death that was lying there in the hours leading up to Mother's Day. So that entire day she was just there by herself, bleeding all over this pond. And they had found her still fully clothed to that fact, and after they had found her, they had said the hours leading after that, they had actually maybe found a suspect, a young boy who lived in the area, and they had arrested him. And the investigations would continue to what his correlation was throughout these events that were leading up to Mother's Day when they found her. Now, it was stated during this case that the young boy was arrested on May 10th, the following day after Tristyn was found. He was interrogated and found on surveillance footage, this boy named Aiden fucci, and during his investigations it was said that he had changed his story up multiple times, his whereabouts, and he didn't really have an accurate depiction of what he might have been doing during the previous night, where he was also stated to have been roaming around the neighborhood, just walking around in the late hours of the night that followed up to the girl being found in the retention pond. Now, what would a young boy have to be doing in the neighborhood, just roaming around in the late hours that led up to this catastrophe? And some police reports had stated that during the night of Tristyn's death, Well, a mutual friend of both Aiden and Tristyn had claimed that Aiden and the boy were both hanging out at his house in those late hours of May 8th, and while they were hanging out together, the two boys, Aiden had actually asked the mutual friend for Tristyn's phone number. And once he got the phone number, he would then follow up by texting Tristyn and convincing her to leave her own home and come over to hang out with the two boys at the mutual friend's house. And this is actually backed up by surveillance footage of somewhere local near Settlestone Drive, where two kids are seen to be walking along the sidewalk during these late hours of, 9 p.m., 10 p.m., 11 p.m. Why would two young kids be walking by themselves, and why would Tristyn feel comfortable enough to be walking along the sidewalk with a random boy that she had barely probably known at all? And it was probably because it was to go to this mutual friend's house, or it might have been after the fact, and she might have felt comfortable knowing that, there's probably someone there that I know. According to an arrest warrant from the sheriff's office on that day, May 9th, while investigations were going on and the scouring of the neighborhood was happening to find Tristyn, and once they eventually found her body lying in the retention pond, Aiden was apparently at home that whole time with his mom. This 14-year-old boy, who was just one grade above Tristyn, and they went to the same school, they were there together at his house. And even though they were together, it was later found that he had said to investigators that he and Tristyn were hanging out at that mutual friend's house in the late hours of the night. So much so late that they had been walking together late around 1 a.m. along North Durban Parkway together, after maybe they had not known each other, or maybe they did. But it's unclear when they might have left together, and thankfully it was captured on some surveillance footage of that 1 a.m. stroll through the night of the neighborhood. And not only that, but his house was actually just a quarter mile away in the same neighborhood from where her body was found in that retention pond. Now after this, it actually starts to get a whole lot darker and deeper with just what the intentions were of each person involved in this whole investigation and situation. Not only does it get darker and deeper, but there are also documents from the state attorney's office. These documents that had evidence of emails of dozens from students and peers that knew both Aiden and Tristyn, who went to Patriot Oaks Academy School together, and all of these emails were of evidence of the two people, but one stood out in particular. One of those emails was from the mutual friend. And this email from the mutual friend was going on to state in bullet points that he was trying to explain what had happened in the events that accounted for what might have led up to these allegations and the arrest of Aiden, and why she was alone dead. Apparently this mutual friend had stated that while Aiden and Tristyn were both at his house that night, Aiden had also become very aggressive, agitated, aggravated, and angry while Tristyn was at the house with them, and this might have something to do with just how she ended up, and why he ended up alone walking home that night. Why would Aiden have any business being angry, especially with a smaller girl where he's alone walking on the street with her? Why would he have a reason to feel agitated in any way? And so agitated that it was stated in this case he followed up that agitation by causing harm to her initially, where he would get so angry that he would push her to the ground, and so much so that she lost control of how she was catching herself, that she really didn't have any control. And during this fall, and after he pushed her, she hit her head on the ground. Now this is just super frustrating and just kind of pathetic, because as a bigger person, and even while you're walking a girl down the street, especially at night, at any time for that matter, it's supposed to come with politeness and respect for each other, making sure that each other gets to their destination safely. But instead, he decided to take advantage of that and take his anger out on her, making her hit her head on the pavement.
Do you know if she turned the other direction, or she was just still walking behind you?
She pushed her down and you all we shouldn't talking.
I just asked what he's going to cost. I understand.
Alright everyone, before we get into the rest of this crime story, if you believe that the victims of Aiden Fucci deserve to get justice, toss my face into the depths of the crime universe in the next 5 seconds to get Aiden off the screen and subscribe to this channel. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Did you do it? Yeah? Okay, let's move on with this case. It gets worse from there. Not only did the two go their separate ways, and she had probably been hurt from this incident, but Aiden is seen again a couple of hours later at around 3:30 in the morning, and not only that, but he's seen going back the opposite direction down Derby Parkway in the neighborhood, and he's not just walking with her anymore, he's actually running in the opposite direction back to around where his house is, and he's not carrying the same demeanor anymore. He's actually seen entering his house through some more surveillance footage, and not only that, but he's barefoot this time, carrying his shoes in his hand. Now, why would he need to take his shoes off, and why would he be running in the opposite direction after having pushed her down? This kind of goes back to those emails that the detectives got of the mutual friend explaining his side of the story. Well, remember when Tristyn was found in the retention pond? That was a wooded area where people would go on trails for walks or runs, and while Aiden had gone back home in the middle of that night with his shoes off and running in the opposite direction, that mutual friend had actually stated that that night he had given Aiden a sweatshirt to change into, but he hadn't seen that sweatshirt since, and in the surveillance footage he was also wearing different clothes than from when he left that mutual friend's house. So that mutual friend was also convinced that Aiden might have had some other clothes to change into, and that was even more fishy, because why would he need to change into anything and run away from the location where he had last been seen with Tristyn in the surveillance footage with his shoes in his hand? From some statements made by prosecutors during this trial, it was stated that by the time Tristyn was last seen at nearly 2 in the morning walking down the street with Aiden, and by the time he had gotten home at around 3:30 with his shoes off his feet in his hands and in a state of panic to get home, well, there were multiple angles of surveillance around that house. And not only that, but by the time they found Tristyn's body in the pond, they had also found a giant buck knife. This buck knife that was now the main piece of evidence that they thought was used in her stabbings. In those same emails, that same mutual friend had also said that if Aiden had been charged with this murder crime, then he had believed that it was 100% premeditated. But was this the friend's way of more so clearing his name, keeping any suspicions away from himself? Not only that, but because he was part of the reason why Tristyn had gone out that night, it was a mutual friend that she was comfortable with, and it was his house. And in addition to that, he had also said that not only did he believe it was premeditated, but he also thought that Aiden's family and themselves might have been in danger, because if this would have happened to Tristyn and he was already aggravated, then he could have done something to them. But including with that sweatshirt, and trying to clear his name with these statements through email, was his friend just trying to flip the script all over Aiden? And was that sweatshirt a way to kind of take evidence out and help his friend dress with different clothes that might have had evidence DNA on it prior? Not only that, but according to the warrant affidavit of this case, while everything that Aiden had carried with him in a panic at 3 a.m. back to his house was later found by investigators, and while medical examiners were checking everything, it sort of started to make a little bit more sense as to who he was in this entire situation. They ended up finding that sweatshirt, they ended up finding his shoes, all in his bedroom. Not only that, but they found blood on all of it, blood stains, and those same blood stains were from Tristyn's DNA. The blood that they had gotten from Tristyn's body, and medical examiners had also stated that it was due to harsh, blunt force trauma, and that in itself would have created any kind of evidence all over his clothes, blood stains, blood splatter, the whole nine. The medical examiners that were to take a look at her body in this scene, they were to go through each wound and see just how she ended up the way that she did. They would go on to describe this in a lot of different ways, and mostly saying that it was one of the most aggravated murder crimes of this forceful stabbing that they had ever seen. Not only that, but that buck knife that investigators had found, well, it was missing a piece to it. And while medical examiners were looking through her body and the wounds that she had, they ended up matching this silver-colored buck knife that was gigantic in the first fact, but not only that, they found other stab wounds in other places, and specifically in her head. They found the broken tip of this silver-colored buck knife still stuck in her head, a wound so harsh that the knife actually broke off from the tip of it, leaving her with many, many wounds. The people in this case that were in support of Tristyn actually came out to a few, and there was a couple of specific people that knew them both on a day-to-day basis throughout the school that they attended. And not only that, but they would go on to explain to detectives about how Aiden was in his day-to-day, how dark and mysterious he actually was. They would also go on to explain that they noticed he had been carrying around a buck knife with him in his casual day-to-day at school, and this buck knife would later go on to be matched with the same one that he would go to carry, the one that was found in the retention pond. It was the same knife that he would carry with himself. And, they say that you are who you hang around with. Your closest friends are who you might turn out to be. But in this case, it really seemed like, Aiden was completely alone in how he depicted himself, how he approached his life. Nobody around him really related in terms of just carrying around a knife casually or having the enticing feeling to hurt people, for that matter, just like how Tristyn was who she hung around with. But she actually took a more spirited, positive route throughout her life than he did. So, with the compiling evidence of this case, with Tristyn's body being found by that pond with pieces of the knife still stuck in her head, and Aiden's evidence of the surveillance footage where he has clothing articles with her literal blood DNA evidence all over it, he was indefinitely charged with her murder crime, and he was arrested and being held at the Department of Juvenile Justice facility in Daytona Beach of Florida. And although he was charged as a juvenile and as a second-degree murder charge, this really didn't sit okay with the announcements that would come following all of these findings of evidence, and people around the area, especially Florida, were really just sending messages to the state attorney's office and the sheriff's department because they didn't think that he was getting enough consequence. He was being charged as a child, and they were saying that he really had this aggravated charge, this assault against her, and it was so gruesome, so terrible, that he deserved harsher penalties for it all, leaving her the way that she was, and it being premeditated in the first place. And I can't even really imagine how it must feel to everyone, especially someone who's leading the safety of a town and a well-known neighborhood that is supposed to be safe and secure and quiet. Just like Sheriff Hardwick was when all of this happened pretty much right under his nose, and he had to be the spokesperson throughout all of this by saying that this definitely was not an accident. It was a ruthless, cold-blooded murder of a 13-year-old girl who did not deserve to die. He was so angry in his speeches that he didn't even really want to mention Aiden's name and give him that limelight.
It's one of those cases that will never go away. May 9th of 2021 will be forever etched in my mind.
And I don't blame him, because first of all, you're the sheriff. You should know what's going on in your town and really the crimes involved in what to expect for different people and just different things happening around. You should be on top of it. And for you to have to talk about such a young girl that was so brutally taken advantage of in the middle of the night, especially on a holiday, that must not be an easy speech to give, especially for the parents that have to hear it.
This is a community that's very tight. As you all know, the circumstances are surrounding this, of where everything's kind of at. It's relative to each other. These kids went to the same school together. This is a very tight-knit community over there, and again, I can't thank our community enough.
Plus, not luckily for Tristyn, of course, but luckily maybe for the justice that her family would eventually probably be served for this case, is that R.J. Larissa, the state attorney for Florida's 7th Judicial Circuit, he actually came out with a press conference for St. Johns County saying that, considering the evidence, considering how aggravated this assault was against Tristyn and her body, and considering every evidence piece against Aiden, that it was good reasoning to upgrade his sentencing, so he would eventually get harsher charges against him. Not only that, but especially because it was found that she was stabbed more than 100 times.
Bottom line is that premeditation could be inferred, certainly, from just the sheer number of stab wounds that Tristyn Bailey had to suffer. Every time that arm went back and every time that arm went down, that was premeditation. And it happened, if you times 114 by 2, that's 228. But it's not just the fact that she was stabbed 14 times, or 114 times. It's also information that we were able to glean from witnesses. The defendant made statements to several people.
A poor girl being taken advantage of so thoughtlessly, so aggressively, and a piece of it being stuck in her because this guy couldn't handle his anger issues in the middle of the night, while she should have been safe, been walked home instead. But now, her family might not even be able to recognize their own daughter from all of the stab wounds. And in that press conference, Attorney Larissa was continuing to speak on all of the environments around what led up to his decision, saying that a lot of people had been speculating and speaking in terms of defending Tristyn, saying that they knew Aiden to be around school and to be out to get people, saying that he often claimed that he wanted to kill someone. And not only that, but he wanted to specifically take them into the woods and murder them there.
He intended to kill someone. He didn't say who that was, but he indicated to witnesses that he was going to kill someone by taking them in the woods and stabbing them, which are certainly the facts of this case.
And so that went to like the direct evidence of what made the attorney change his mind and giving him a harsher sentence, because this definitely was at least months, if not longer, of a planning and premeditation for Aiden to just harm anyone that he could probably get his hands on. But speaking as a sort of diplomatic factor of this whole case, Attorney Larissa ended up going on to say that it was sad on both sides as well, because it's a sad decision that this boy had to do all of this and that they had to upgrade his charges. And it was also a sad state of affairs that Tristyn was left the way that she was, so brutally murdered and taken advantage of. And counting in those things, that it was really the only decision that they could go with, saying that it was such a tragic way to go about it for Aiden that it was all that he really deserved. It was now part of his fate to get harsher charges against him and to be tried as an adult. It was really the only thing left to do.
This is serious.
It's very serious.
This is no joke. This is your whole life. Your whole life.
And yours.
And ours. And your brothers and sisters.
Attorney R.J. Larissa continued throughout speeches and different statements, saying that it was arguably a huge understatement to say that it was just simply horrific, and to understand the gravity of everything, while the entire state of Florida and the neighborhood was coming together in terms of understanding just how tragic this was, including people that also knew Aiden Fucci at school and knew what his day-to-day demeanor was like, people like even his girlfriend at the time. Yes, he had a girlfriend that he would also mistreat in certain ways that would come off as like playful, and not so much playful for him, but playful for the other people that were surrounded by him.
Was it, usually a different knife? Did he have one that he was partial to that was like his favorite? Or
he had like a few. He didn't really say he had a favorite. He just had knives, and sometimes he'd bring one or another. Or
did he say any? Did he have? I mean, when you say knives, we're talking like
just like pocket knives,
like folding pocket knives.
Yeah, like they would fold up and.
Okay. If you had to describe any of them that you can remember, could you tell me about what they looked like?
Yeah. Well, there was mainly two that he would have on him, and it was one that his stepdad gave him. It was like a kind of gray, black, like army-looking one. It had a skull on it, maybe like an orange skull on it or something, and he called it Picker.
Okay.
Because it had, I guess, teeth. The knife had.
You mean like it had a serrated edge?
Yeah.
Okay. Did he have any others that he kept?
Yeah.
Normally.
There was another one. It was like yellow, and it was like it was made out of wood, I think.
Okay.
And he called that one.
Did it look like this?
Yeah.
Did it look like it, or is that the same type of knife?
That's the same knife.
Okay. And just so you understand, I'm holding a folding buck knife.
Yeah.
With a brass frame, right? And a wooden handle? Okay. So you've seen him carry a knife like that?
Yeah.
Pretty commonly?
Yeah, it was mainly those two.
Did Aiden ever discuss anything to you that would make you think he wanted to try to use a knife on somebody or anything like that?
Aiden talked about killing people a lot.
He did?
Yeah. But Aiden and I had a dark sense of humor, and I never took him seriously.
Right.
He talked about wanting to kill me. Sometimes he would take his knife and pretend to stab me with it, or sometimes he would come up behind me and put it against my throat and pretend to slit my throat. But I wasn't scared or anything. He never...
You trusted him.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, he would also, like, freak out if he accidentally elbowed me and apologize, shit like that, so...
That in itself is a dark foresight into this whole situation, because the people that are around him, well, they could be seen as people that could have probably put a stop to all of this. People that could have spoken up and talked to an authority figure at the school, or their own parents. I know that anybody doesn't deserve to be told that, especially as a joke. Something like that shouldn't be taken so lightly, but unfortunately, for him and his environment, it was. Now, that wasn't the only thing that his girlfriend brought up in talking about him and saying that she saw different signs of him being unsafe towards others and to himself, because she also said that, well, he would say sometimes that he even heard voices in his head telling him to do different things, telling him to live certain ways, or he would describe certain things that those voices would tell him. And he was also on antidepressants, which was brought up in the court in the trial hearings in terms of what medications he was on and how they affected his day-to-day behavior. Now, this is all a situation that was boiling up over all of these different qualities of Aiden. It just really seems like with each added puzzle piece of this case that Aiden has been looking this whole time for his opportunity, his moment to really see someone that he could take advantage of, that he could slit someone's throat, and he pretty much ended up doing that. Like, his fantasies, the voices that he was hearing, obviously his medication wasn't even working. And not only did he hear her voices, not only was he on antidepressants, not only did he joke about slitting his own girlfriend's throat, but after the matter of, well, Tristyn being dead at the pond, once investigations were going out and Aiden had been taken into custody and arrested to take into interrogation for questioning, well, he was actually noticed in the police car to be on his phone. And not only on his phone, but it was just a really morbid way of him communicating just how careless he was for this whole situation. Because there's evidence of a photo where he's taking a selfie, throwing up a peace sign, and saying, "Has anybody seen Tristyn lately?" And knowing that he was the main suspect in her death after that night into the next day when he was arrested, that's like a direct reflection of the way that he was just joking about taking her through that night and murdering her with all of these stab wounds of 100 plus, including that buck knife piece that was stuck in her head from his aggression. He really didn't care at all what he had done.
Cop car. Yep.
So, with RJ Larissa speaking on behalf of the evidence that detectives and medical examiners found throughout the trial, it was also said that, well, Tristyn had maybe about 50 wounds, including that 100. So she had around 100 total, and half of those were defensive. Those were her trying to save herself, trying to block him off, trying to run away, trying to do something that would get him away from her. And that just goes to show that this was more so premeditated than anything, and she thought that she was in good hands. She might have trusted him and was realizing that she was in a bad situation when it was too late. And it was too late for a lot of people, including Aiden, but his mom didn't care about that. His mom is also an accomplice in this whole thing. She actually took it upon herself to find Aiden's clothes, his shirt, his shoes, and she would actually take it upon herself to go into a washroom and specifically try and scrub out the blood DNA of Tristyn off of his clothes once he was taken into custody by police. She was tampering with evidence. Tampering with the fact that this is a murder scene, a crime scene, all of the things in his house, she's now a part of the whole thing as a suspect. And that in itself is a third-degree felony for her, which is punishable for up to 5 years. And this goes on to say that she may not have exactly gotten the charges that she deserved because she was defending a murderer. She probably knew some sort of thing was wrong from seeing so much blood and still decided, I'm going to defend my son at all costs, no matter who the victim was or what happened to them. Once Aiden's mom was facing her trial in court for tampering with evidence for that 5-year sentencing, which is what her punishment would have been, Well, she initially pled not guilty to all of that, even though she was blatantly caught on camera, but she would go on to change her plea from not guilty to no contest, which would pretty much communicate to the court that she neither admitted or disagreed with what charges were against her, and she would just take whatever they gave her in terms of what they decided that she deserved for what they found, but she wouldn't say, yeah, I did it. Now, that is just as careless as Aiden. It's like the home wreckage of this entire thing, his parental guardian not really taking accountability for what she had done. It's your kid, but they're all kids in this situation, and as an adult, she really should have admitted her wrongdoings, especially by blatantly touching all of the evidence and putting her own DNA on it. And along with Crystal Smith, Aiden's family basically, well, she wasn't the only family that was involved in giving statements and testifying against Aiden and for Tristyn. Tristyn's family, also known as the Bailey Seven, well, a few of them came out to speak, and her sister, Alexis, well, she actually had an entire presentation ready for the court to depict just how dark, how tragic, how gruesome this murder crime was of Aiden committing it against Tristyn and stabbing her repeatedly, so much so that she brought a glass jar to court. And this glass jar, she intended to fill it up with stones, blue stones that were the favorite color of Tristyn, and she would depict the stab wounds through throwing these blue stones into the jar. Not only were they stones, but it was 114 of them. 114 stones to depict each stab wound that medical examiners found along Tristyn's body. And you better bet that while she was tossing these stones in the courtroom, it was nearly 3 minutes or so of dead silence from everybody just being struck and in shock from how this looked, how this sounded. Just 114 stones to depict each stab wound is completely graphic to anybody that could have witnessed this or to hearing it and just imagining what Tristyn had gone through. That was her sister's way of grieving through the trial, of showing, this is my sister, this is what you did to her, this is the depth at which it all hit us with. Alexis, in her testimony, would go on to have a few things to say to Aiden, to the court.
Did she cry for my mother? Did she beg you to stop?
Each strike that Tristyn took, each strike that my family is having to deal with. Agony isn't painful enough, shattered to the core doesn't crumble how I feel inside, and infuriated doesn't even touch the aggravation that I'm tapped into with my body and mind throughout this whole situation.
I have been diagnosed with depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder. I have been unable to work at times during this process due to the trauma and PTSD attacks triggered by knives, blood, and open wounds. My relationships have suffered. My physical and mental health has diminished, and my goals for the future have seemingly disappeared. Aiden Fucci didn't just take Tristyn's life that day. He took everything from us. Our family, sense of security, laughs, health, and potential. For us, justice does not exist in this case, and closure does not exist in this case. Peace, understanding, and forgiveness will never come.
Her older sister, Brittany, was actually just newly married. She was going on her honeymoon while Tristyn was being murdered. She was trying to have a good time and celebrate her loving marriage. Could you imagine being an older sibling and coming home to find out that your sister has been brutally stabbed to death and left in a pond in the woods?
Your Honor, I could stand up here today and tell you what little I can remember from May 9th, 2021. How I was on day 1 of my honeymoon with my husband and woke up to an alarming call from my sister Alexis saying, "Brace yourself. We can't find Tristyn."
They wanted to go even further than that. There was actually a petition signed by the state and a bunch of people in the area of the town and the state of Florida. 700,000 or about that amount of signatures were signed on this petition to get even harsher sentencing against Aiden, but they went on to say that they actually couldn't give him something like the death sentence because he was still a child, and so the most that they could do was give him the life in prison sentencing, which was the maximum that they could decide on his behalf. So just a few days later, Aiden was indefinitely indicted on the first-degree murder charge, and part of what was helpful for that, Attorney Larissa was referring to the previous comments that were made of Aiden by people that knew him, his girlfriend, and people that would see him on a daily basis. Those statements of he would make jokes about wanting to kill someone, he joked about slitting her throat, and he carried that knife around on a consistent basis. Those previous statements are actually what helped in terms of giving a more severe punishment and making it logical for the court. Now, not only that, but Forrest Bailey also gave a testimony, her father, in saying that, well, he knew that when she was brought out of this life, that she gave it her very best. She always gave it her all. She was a loving family member. They would always consider her part of the family. She was a great teammate, and she always invested her whole self into everything. They would always consider her part of the Bailey Seven. Attorney Larissa went on by saying a lot of different things towards the parents of this entire state of Florida for this case, saying that he hopes that it's a lesson learned by parents in terms that they should be more aware, more attentive of what their kids' intentions are, what they're saying, what they're doing in their daily lives. They should get more of a hold on their at-home families. And that even though this death of Tristyn, this murder crime, couldn't have been prevented, well, they have to pay attention to it going forward. And they have to make a learning experience out of this, if not more than that. It's tragic that it could only be a learning experience at this point. Now, Aiden actually eventually pled guilty in February of 2023, and he would go on to get his sentencing eventually. But what's pathetic to me about all of this is that even though he pled guilty and would receive punishment for first-degree murder, he went on by talking to his own mom and the Bailey family about all of this, saying that he was sorry to each family member for causing this tragic, horrifying PTSD event. But it really doesn't seem like he was sorry at all. Thinking back to that Snapchat photo, you're making a mockery of the entire situation. You don't care what you did. You're really just caring that you got caught. You're upset that you now have to deal with the consequences of your actions for such a brutal thing towards an innocent girl. Following the next about a month, on March 24th of 2023, Judge Smith would eventually sentence Aiden on the first-degree murder charge for Tristyn's death, and by saying that it was an atrocious and heinous act by him, and he orchestrated it not only because of a mental illness of hearing voices or anything like that, but he really just committed the crime just to feel what it was like to kill someone. That in the end, it really seemed like it was nothing other than to just be horrible to a person and take their life. So at this point, even though Aiden is not getting a death penalty, he is getting a life sentence. He'll be getting 40 years to life, and on top of that, well, Stacey Bailey, Tristyn's mom, she really made a powerful statement against his mom, Crystal Smith, by saying that, I hope that going forward, you recognize and acknowledge that you as a mother aren't going to have your kids with you. Just like I'm not going to have my daughter with me because your son took her away from me. I hope you can sit with this acknowledgement.
Did not know that I needed to teach Tristyn to be afraid of the evil in her own school. Aiden Fucci, you betrayed us all.
But it doesn't stop there, and there will be future decisions to be made about just how far they will go to give him his consequences. Now, Forrest Bailey went on to say that as far as the justice for his daughter goes, he felt like it was justified, like considering the verdict and how atrocious and heinous the crime was from Aiden stabbing his daughter to death, that he felt like it was adequate. Now, there is more to that in terms of that he said that he thought there shouldn't be any more stress put onto Aiden's family, that Aiden's family has dealt with enough as far as Aiden goes murdering the girl, that they don't deserve more backlash, more blame for how this whole case turned out, that they deserve to go throughout this with more peace, just like how his own family does. And not only that, but after 25 years that Aiden will serve in prison, they're actually going to go back and reconsider his whole sentencing. In terms of how his mental health is, if he needs rehabilitation, if he needs restitution, or even lighter sentencing. They're going to decide that after his 25 years of service. in the prison sentencing, and they're going to consider whether he needs less sentencing or more. Now, I definitely think that he deserves the maximum sentence no matter what, whether or not he had mental health problems or not. This was definitely an ongoing plan of his to take advantage of someone. Now, what do you all think? Do you think that he deserves a harsher sentence, or do you think as a kid he deserves a second chance? He might deserve more of a lighter sentencing on his side and a life lived after prison, because I think that it definitely doesn't need to go any less than what it has been. Now, if you guys want to see me cover any more true crime cases just like this one, I will be covering a lot more stories in the future on this channel, and I will see you guys in the next one.